to the Environmental Leadership Chronicles, a podcast brought to you by the California Association of Environmental Professionals. In this episode, we feature Bill Halligan, Matt Klopfenstein, and Kristin Blackson discussing their work with the AEP Legislative Committee. Bill Halligan is Senior Director and Senior Environmental Counsel with Harrison Associates. He has prepared hundreds of environmental documents for a diverse range of projects throughout California. As a member and former chair of AEP's Legislative Review Committee, Bill works directly with the State Legislature and AEP's Lobbyist, Matt Klopfenstein, on proposed legislation related to CEQA. Matt Klopfenstein is a partner at CalAdvisors, and he represents clients in legislative and regulatory arenas. He also specializes in technology, energy, environment, water, transportation, and local government policymaking. Matt serves as the Legislative Policy Director and Lobbyist for AEP. And we welcome back Kristin Blackson. Kristin is Vice President of Environmental Planning with WSP and co-chair of the AEP Legislative Committee, where she has successfully advocated for revising and creating CEQA legislation that benefits practitioners and the public throughout California. She shares her expertise as a professor for the UCSD Extension CEQA Certificate Program. The Legislative Committee provides analysis, prepares comment letters, and conducts direct lobbying on legislative bills relating to CEQA. On this podcast panel, Bill, Matt, and Kristin discuss CEQA policy related to topics such as housing, noise ordinance, and sports. Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hello. Hi. It's good to be here with some fellow Legislative Committee members. My name is Kristin Blackson, and I've been serving on the Legislative Committee for about 8 years, but not as long as Bill and Matt have been working on the Legislative Committee. I work as a CEQA consultant for WSP and also for AEP. I serve as our Director at Large. And I also have been serving as the co-chair of our Legislative Committee. And it is absolutely my favorite thing to do for AEP. So that's my introduction. Bill, please.
All right. Good to see you, Kristin and Matt. Good to be with you. My name is Bill Halligan. I am until recently, I was AEP state president, where I served 2 terms. So I am still a member of the board as the immediate past president, and I'm a member of the Legislative Review Committee. And then I also work for a consulting firm named Harrison Associates, where I serve as senior director and senior environmental counsel, primarily in the practice of California CEQA law, California Environmental Quality Act compliance, and entitlement work as well.
Great.
Cool.
Matt, you want to go ahead and introduce?
Sure. Matt Klopfenstein. I am a partner at CalAdvisors. We are a lobbying firm up here in Sacramento. I have had the pleasure of working with AEP for almost 10 years now, I think, or around 10 years. And I am on contract with AEP to help provide lobbying, advocacy services, and consulting services here in Sacramento as it relates mostly to the state legislature, but also a little bit of work with the state agencies. So helping AEP, working with the Legislative Review Committee to analyze bills, weigh in on bills, and kind of just maintain our relationships and connection to the state legislature.
Great. So that's what we're here today to discuss is the Legislative Committee, the work that we do, and filling in our members about our activities there, and what we have been doing in the past 8 or 10 years working with the legislator on CEQA issues, CEQA bills, lately CEQA reform. So what is the purpose of the AEP Legislative Committee? And I'm thinking 8 to 10 years ago, but how long has AEP been in Sacramento working with legislators?
Well, actually, so the AEP Legislative Review Committee goes way further back. So my first capital trip was probably in the early 2000s. So more like 20 years ago.
Wow.
And our lobbyist at the time was named Alan Lind, and Alan Lind retired. And so I myself, along with Gene Talmadge, it was our job to find a new lobbyist, and we interviewed several firms, and we met Matt's partner, Will Gonzalez, and the group at CalAdvisors, and that was probably 15 years ago, and
wow.
we couldn't have picked a better group, and Will and Matt have just done an unbelievable job for AEP and really raising our presence at the Capitol and in Sacramento.
I agree. Anything to add, Matt?
No, I think the history or kind of the long-term approach that we have as the legislative committee is really being subject matter experts. And so it's been really great to develop, I think, a very robust legislative committee that has definitely, as both of you can attest to, has evolved over the years. Obviously, the membership changes a lot, but and has developed really like a core of the Legislative Review Committee that really, at this point, truly understand how the legislature works, how bills work, have really good political reads now, just because we've all been doing this for a long time. So.
Yeah, I mean, I was I had no idea the first time that we came. I mean, I wasn't even sure about the process, how there are two houses and each house has to hear the bill and then they flip. I was completely unaware of all that process. So I do remember just picking your brain the first time we were walking the halls. I probably had 1,000 questions for you. Who's that? What do they do?
And now everybody's a grizzled veteran. So
yeah, and one of my favorite things about participating on the Legislative Review Committee is our Capitol Days that we do with you every year, and then as part of that, we do a CEQA Hot Topics course with legislators and staffers. And Kristin and I, we've done that for the last several years, and it's a really great opportunity to teach new legislators and staffers about CEQA, about some of the issues that we face, and just keep them updated, and also let them know about AEP, and just let them know that we're here as a resource if they have any bills related to the environment or the California Environmental Quality Act.
Yeah, Matt, would you expand upon that a little bit more? Because I think that's important for people to know that our role there at the Capitol, not only during Capitol Days, but all year long, is really a resource. We do sometimes choose bills to either, very rarely oppose or be a proponent for, but mostly we are there for a resource. And I enjoy that neutrality that we have when we go and visit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we really bring a lot of value with both the lobby day, where we kind of, for those who don't know, we essentially sometimes are in multiple groups, but usually in one group, and go about the Capitol, spend a whole day meeting with as many offices as we can. It can be a little bit frantic, but really trying to spread around and talk to as many members of the relevant committees that we work with and the key staff people who handle the issues that we focus on, whether it's CEQA, housing, other environmental issues. So that, and then also our CEQA Hot Topics or CEQA 101 presentations are really valuable because, CEQA is complicated. And it takes, there's an army of people who do it literally every day. And so to expect legislators or their staff to really fully understand it, when most of them have never worked in CEQA before, and they're being pulled in 1,000 directions. The legislators are, whether they're needing to deal with healthcare and then jump to their next meeting is about energy, and their next meeting is about, internet privacy issues. So to have us, our goal is really to just, ensure that folks know that AEP is here to be a resource to them the same way we are to our members, help educate on how CEQA works, and just make sure that people have at least the baseline understanding of kind of what CEQA is and what it's meant to do. So both the lobby day and then also the annual presentation we do are both super valuable for that.
Yeah, and you guys have been, going to the Capitol longer than I have, but I feel in the last, few years, not only the interest, but the knowledge of CEQA and what we do has been increasing. And, every time we go, I feel like staff is more informed. And I think that that helps a lot when they're dealing with, all the issues that they need to deal with. I'm very impressed by all of them. They're Renaissance people. They know a lot about. Mm-hmm.
It's nice. We've raised the awareness of AEP, and now legislators will actually reach out to Matt, just like, hey, we're thinking about a bill in this space, and then Matt brings it to the Legislative Review Committee, and then we really want to. We want to make sure that the bill actually achieves what it's intended to achieve, and it doesn't end up, making CEQA harder to implement. So I think that's really where that's the role that we provide the legislature.
Agreed. So we've been doing this for a while, and you guys have a lot of background on it. Perhaps this year, can you provide a recap of maybe some of the hot topics that we heard while we recently were in the Capitol, which was last week, correct? Or the week before? The 13th and 14th.
Oh, no, it was, that was last week. Yeah.
Yes. And I have to say it was particularly difficult this year in that downpour storm / wind to walk around the offices. Still fun.
That was pretty insane. So a couple of the big things that were brought up, and I'll let Bill fill in a few as well. But I think, the biggest, and it's no secret and probably no surprise that this is the biggest CEQA issue that people want to talk about, is housing. Especially infill housing seems to be the focus. Whether it's all the news articles about, local governments not allowing certain projects, CEQA often being cited as kind of the obstacle, or litigation from neighborhood groups. There is a lot of attention from folks in the legislature wanting to talk about, ways to adjust CEQA. Specifically, it seems like most of the talking points seem to be about housing. But whether it's changing CEQA or allowing projects to get around CEQA, like SB 35, I think that is far and away the topic of the day for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Almost everyone we met with, housing's definitely top of mind. When Governor Newsom was running for election for his first term, he identified a goal of constructing 500,000 units a year for 7 years. That for a total of 3.5 million units to address the housing crisis here in California. And then at the end of 2018, the legislature passed a number of housing related bills to really hopefully help streamline the production of housing. And 4 years later, we're a little above 110,000 units a year of production, far short of the 500,000, and we're not even back to pre 2008 recession. We were building about 200,000 units a year, so we're not we're just barely over half of what we were producing pre recession. So they've given local agencies a lot of tools to help streamline infill housing and affordable housing projects. Yet that we're not seeing the production, ramp up. And so the legislature is very concerned, and the governor's very concerned that local agencies are not doing their part. For instance, city of Huntington Beach and my city, and they're constant fighting with Sacramento on housing.
Correct. Yeah. a lot of frustration with housing, and you know, as we try to explain, you know, that it's CEQA is a piece of that puzzle, you know, and to focus only on CEQA, you know, there's a whole system in which we need to address housing. But we do have, we are not opposed to providing more efficiencies in the way CEQA addresses housing at all in any way. AEP, you know, we are, you could tell us, Bill, but we have a tenet, a goal to achieve, you know, proper housing, or housing in the proper places, in the proper location.
Right.
Yes.
So AEP has an adopted public policy program, and every several years we revisit that program, our policy program, and it sets out our legislative goals, and you know, we have a very wide and diverse membership in AEP. You know, CEQA practitioners and biologists and engineers, attorneys, air quality specialists, and we really feel that development of housing in urban areas prevents a lot of environmental impacts that would otherwise occur, like with greenfield development. So we promote streamlining for affordable housing, streamlining for infill housing, because if you don't allow it in existing urban areas, it's going to be pushed out to you know, further and further out, away from jobs, greenfield areas where there's, you know, significant biological resources, you know, also forcing, you know, longer commutes and a whole host of traffic and air quality and GHG impacts. So we wholeheartedly support promotion of, you know, housing and various housing types within existing urban areas.
Agreed. Are there any current legislative acts or bills or intent to modify CEQA in ways that would allow for this type of housing?
There are quite a few efforts underway. It's certainly one of the big topics being discussed. I mentioned earlier briefly SB 35 is one of the examples that the legislature has done in the past. That bill actually sunsets in about a year and a half. And so there is a big effort underway this year by Senator Scott Wiener from San Francisco, who authored SB 35, to renew that bill, to extend the sunset and make some changes to SB 35 as well. But mostly he wants to extend the sunset and extend the life of that, you know, program, if you will, to offer ministerial approval of certain housing projects. So that has been one way that the legislature has essentially created CEQA exemptions, is by creating ministerial approval processes for certain types of projects, SB 35 being the most significant. AB 2011 was another bill last year by Assemblymember Wicks that passed to do a similar by right approval process. So getting to bills this year, Senator Wiener's bill is SB 423. So that will be one significant one. Senator Wiener also has another bill to promote this sort of kind of urban housing development. SB 4 is the number of that one. And that one is meant to offer ministerial approval for certain types of housing projects essentially on the property that's already owned by faith-based institutions. So looking at, you know, churches, synagogues, mosques, and then also certain types of housing projects that are on land owned by universities for development of student housing. So that's what his SB 4 would do. And again, those would be ministerial approval processes. So it would be essentially a CEQA exemption.
So ministerial processes do not require discretionary action, right? They're more of a checkbox, which would address some of the concerns that CEQA adds additional red tape to an already, necessary approval in urban areas, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So CEQA is triggered by discretionary actions. So if it's ministerial, it's not subject to CEQA.
Yeah. And the legislature has seemed to like doing those type of exemption bills when they're able to do them, because it also takes away some of the control from the local government as well, where they could, hold up projects. But if it's a by right approval process, then the developer has more likelihood of getting it through. So that seems to have become a popular tool with the legislature.
And I think with various success across the state, right, with various jurisdictions using ministerial processes very successfully to get these type of housings in. I think the city of Fresno has a ministerial process for all housing projects which meet VMT requirements. So it's somewhere to go. It takes, a land use agency and decision makers to be behind that. As Bill had said, there are certain cities who are fighting additional housing, who don't, in my opinion, believe that they're actually cities.
Well, I don't know if I want to touch this one, but there are definitely cities that have made a commitment to building, higher density housing, housing at all income levels, affordable housing, and using the tools. I think City of LA does a great job. City and County of San Francisco. Yes. The city of Anaheim has made a real commitment to housing. But there are a lot of cities out there that, mostly suburban areas, that, and it's not always the electeds. Oftentimes it's the constituents. And if you talk about 4-story housing or, apartments or condos, the public just freaks out. And there's really no political cover for council members if they may have a personal commitment or desire to approve housing, but oftentimes it's political suicide to approve high density housing. So I don't put all the blame on local electeds because they're in a tough spot.
In which so the state's reaction is to, like Matt said, try to take some of those decision making options away from local agencies and mandating.
Well, yeah. So they the housing bills that passed in 2018, a number of those added teeth to housing element law and the RENA allocation, which the regional housing needs assessment. And so it has been difficult in this cycle for a lot of local cities to get a compliant housing element. So as part of that, the legislature, to encourage cities to get their housing element in compliance, there's a number of things like the builder's remedy. Basically, if your housing element is out of compliance, any builder can come in, even if it doesn't have the proper zoning for housing. They can go ahead and submit a tentative map for housing, for an affordable housing project, and it's non-discretionary. So it's a by right housing proposal, and that's one of the issues that the city of Huntington Beach is fighting. They do not like the builder's remedy, and they do not have a compliant housing element at the moment. So
Not to change the subject, it reminds me of the new baseball rule that you have to pitch within 20 seconds.
Yeah,
and if you don't
right.
make it, if the batter doesn't make it, doesn't he have to just get a strike or something? Or if the pitcher doesn't make it, the batter makes it to base.
Right. There's a whole bunch of new rules in baseball this year. Right? Even the players in spring training, they're having trouble keeping up with them.
Yeah. The housing law is the same way. If you don't have one, then fine, anything goes, right? You get to go to base.
Basically, yeah. Basically, you can, you get a walk to first base or even, a home run. You get your project approved by right.
So, housing of all kinds, I think, is already demonstrated what we need in California. Student housing, affordable housing, teacher housing, worker housing, mid housing. We just don't need any more luxury or transient or temporary housing. There is a recent case that AEP has had podcasts on about the Berkeley case, which is all about student housing and the fight to keep, this student housing from occurring by the surrounding community, like you were saying, high level opposition to this public housing. What is the history with that? Has the legislators done? I know that there was a fix quickly last year, and that the issue is now boiling down to noise of students or noise, how noisy any residents will be. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, Matt, do you want to talk about the appellate court case last year and then the legislative fix, and then I can talk about what's going on this year?
Sure. I will not remember the bill number from last year, but I can give much of the info. Folks will remember that there was a court case last year that would have held that UC Berkeley could not admit the higher level of students that they had planned to admit that year. And they cited CEQA as the reason for that because they had not properly analyzed and accounted for this increased student population. And the legislature responded very quickly. There was pretty much immediate uproar within Sacramento about the idea that some students some of whom had already been admitted and accepted enrollment at UC Berkeley could have been forced to either choose another school or have to attend remotely. And so the legislature—
I believe it was like 3,000 students would have to be turned away.
Yeah, it was over 3,000. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the legislature acted very quickly there. They passed what we call a budget trailer bill, which means it gets enacted immediately and takes effect immediately. That overruled that decision and also made changes to the university student planning process generally. So they still have to conduct the planning process they do. It's still subject to CEQA. And so they will still do all the analyses that they are currently doing. But the remedies, if a court were to find that any part of that analysis is not proper, the remedy can no longer result in this kind of immediate reduction of student population. There would have to be, I believe it's 18-month lead time. They give the opportunity to the university to make whatever changes they needed to do in the analysis. So it essentially gets rid of the ability for a court to make a similar finding like they did last year. So that was very quick action by the legislature via a budget trailer bill. And then obviously the UC Berkeley is back in the news again for another CEQA case. So I'll let Bill handle this one.
Yeah. So for the past 2 years, right before our Capitol Days visit, the appellate court has ruled against housing within People's Park on the campus of UC Berkeley. So that was last year. This year, the same appellate court again struck down the EIR for the People's Park project, stating that it did not adequately analyze noise from students. And I guess carving out student population as being noisier than general residential population. And, I guess students party, and the EIR didn't look at the potential for students to be partying and having impacts on the adjacent residents, the adjacent community off campus. And I guess it's been a very contentious relationship, just like many universities. They struggle with their relationship with the surrounding community. And there's a NIMBY group in Berkeley that has a history of suing UC Berkeley anytime they try to do something. So it was the same group, and they sued again. The court ruled that the CEQA analysis was inadequate because of noise. And so as a result, this year we have a bill. It's a spot bill relating to noise. It's AB 1307 by Assemblymember Buffy Wicks. And it will be a very small carve out to unamplified noise from residential populations. So that would no longer be considered an impact under CEQA.
Unamplified noise. Oh.
Unamplified, yeah. Now, amplified noise, would be protected or would be governed by the local noise ordinance.
So you could be really loud without music past 10 and it's okay because it's not subject to the noise ordinance. Right.
With this bill, that voices, as long as it's unamplified, or if it's Bill Halligan playing acoustic guitar.
Ooh. So yeah, as long as you're not plugged in.
Yeah, as long as I don't plug in, I think I'm exempt from CEQA.
You just have to go back and become a student.
Yes, which I would love to do. That'd be great.
Just to demonstrate to them.
Yeah, and just process-wise, so this bill is brand new, obviously, and the legislative session is just getting started. So it has not been heard in committees yet. I think it has a long way to go before end of session in September. And so I think AEP's legislative committee is taking a look at this bill to kind of think through whether this actually even solves the Berkeley situation. If it only is saying that unamplified voices are no longer a substantial impact under CEQA, does that leave open the opposition to still make a claim that, well, what we're really worried about is parties where, students are listening to music, which is amplified. So it may not actually do much to resolve the situation that Berkeley found itself in. So I think it's going to be an interesting discussion on this bill to see what, if anything, they do to change it to really try and carve out really just residential noises generally as not a CEQA issue.
I think they should just pay for more police to enforce the noise ordinance that exists.
Something tells me the students of Berkeley would like that even less than than additional CEQA analysis.
So yes, tell as we wrap up. So can you expand a little bit? So while we go early in the bill season to discuss with legislators, we're still tracking these bills as they go, and they do often change so much that often we don't even need to get worked up about it until a certain point where we know, right? Is that correct?
Yeah. So the legislature introduces about 2,500, 2,600 bills every year. At the end, usually somewhere around 1,000 of those become law. Sometimes a little bit less, sometimes a little bit more. So obviously a lot fall by the wayside as they go through the process. And basically every bill goes through multiple rounds of amendments as it makes its way through the kind of up and down legislative process. As you kind of mentioned before, there's two houses, so both houses has to approve of every single bill. And we're actually about a month and a half or so away from when all those bills, actually about 2 months away from when all the bills have to move from their first house to their second house. And so a lot of folks joke that that's when the real work starts to happen on a bill. It's gotten out of its first house, but then once it's in the other house, that's when real amendments start to happen, real work starts to happen. So there's still a long way to go on the many, many bills. I think we've got about 75 bills or so that AEP's legislative committee is monitoring. And so we are, starting with the most significant first and trying to vet those and see if there's anything we need to comment on early in the session. And then also, we had lots of really great conversations last week with policymakers and have a lot of questions from them asking, well, do you have any advice for this? Or do you have any suggestions here? And so the Legislative Review Committee is also working on all of that to try and be responsive early in the session too. So.
Great. Anything to add, Bill?
No, I think Matt covered it. We're in the first year of a 2-year legislative session. And, I have seen, there's what's called gut and amend. I remember back in, I believe it was 2013, SB 743, the bill, we're tracking a bill, AEP's following it, nothing earth shattering. And then at the very end of the legislative session, SB 743 turned into a bill to exempt the Sacramento Kings Arena from CEQA. And then it changed how we looked at traffic from level of service to vehicle miles traveled. And we were scrambling at the very end because it was kind of innocuous, and then they added all this stuff at the very end, and we were trying to comment, but it was the train had left the station.
Ship had sailed. Yeah.
Yes, gut and amends are still a common thing. We now have the 72-hour rule, which has been one of the best laws that the people of California have passed by initiative that makes all bills be in print for 3 days before they can be voted on. So it helps the last minute deal making and prevents gut and amends on the last night of session, thankfully. But it doesn't mean they don't happen 3 days before session.
Yeah, I think the problem with that particular gut and amend was, the naysayers of the CEQA process will say, well, you can exempt an entire stadium. Why can't you, right? Why can't
the legislature can.
Understood, but it's still for those that aren't familiar, with how CEQA works and how CEQA is amended. We are the face of CEQA, right? We practice it, we consult it, so I feel like we get the majority of the brunt of the issues, and that's always one I hear is, how does CEQA work for the legislators deciding that such a large stadium is exempt? But it's a process.
And that Kings Arena was just the first of what's become many. I think just about every ballpark since then, several in LA, the Bay Area, have all gotten similar treatment in CEQA. Right. So,
yep.
The doors were open.
It's like the ultimate statement of overriding considerations.
Yeah. I want this.
Yes. The Kings need to stay in Sacramento. Give them a new arena.
Yeah.
And I will say it's finally coming to fruition with our first winning season and playoff appearance since that bill passed. So
yes,
like the beam.
It's nice. I've seen some events there at the new arena.
Yeah,
and it's nice stadium. That it's right downtown. That's really great.
Well, it's really great to talk to you guys today. I'm glad that we had a chance to fill in our members and everyone about what we do on the Legislative Committee. And as always, I so much appreciate Matt's help and organizing us and keeping us involved and on time. And it's just really, it's a pleasure. Thank you, Matt.
It is my pleasure.
Yes, I will just do a shout out. There does appear to be some appetite for CEQA reform at the legislature. So if any AEP members or CEQA practitioners watching this have some ideas for maybe some tweaks to CEQA that might help,
particularly when it comes to housing and making it,
especially affordable housing and housing in general. Please email Kristin, myself, or Matt, and you can find our email addresses on the AEP website, which is califaep.org.
Thank you all.
Okay, all right. Thanks, Kristin. Great seeing you guys.
Nice to see
Thanks,
you.
Matt.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to be updated when new episodes are released and leave us a review to let us know what you think. It also really helps us to share the podcast with others who may enjoy learning about the environmental industry. If you want to submit a shout out or any feedback, please send an email or voice memo to podcast@califaep.org. The email again is podcast with an S, podcast@califaep.org.